business is a hearing on Senate Bill 5. So I will ask the reviser to come up and tell us what this bill is all about.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. In case you were wondering if Mike just de-aged over the weekend, it's not. It's Jason Long. You get the backup today. Sorry. Senate Bill 5 is a bill coming over from the Senate to prohibit expenditure of federal funds for elections and election-related activities without legislative approval. It amends one statute under the current election code. This is the Transparency and Revenues Underwriting Elections Act, KSA 25-2436. The current statute makes it a felony for an election official to knowingly accept or spend monies from any person for the purpose of conducting an election unless approved by the legislature or permitted by state law. There are exemptions for the collection of fees and assessed charges by an election official, and also campaign contributions for the office of county clerk. Senate Bill 5 expands the prohibition in a couple of different ways. First of all, it specifically includes monies that are provided by any branch, agency, department, office, or bureau of the federal government. So any monies coming from a federal agency are included in the prohibition. And this would be in addition to any monies that are provided under current law, prohibited by any monies provided by a private individual or organization. And then second, Senate Bill 5 expands the expenditure of monies for conducting elections or election-related activities, including voter registration and voter assistance efforts. If those monies can be expended for such activities, then expenditures can only be for the purposes authorized by the appropriation of those funds. The penalty remains the same, a level 9 non-person felony. And again, there is the caveat that if the expenditure is approved by an act of the Kansas legislature or by state law that's already in existence, and it can be accepted and expended for those purposes. Otherwise, such acceptance and expenditure is prohibited. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for the reviser? So I've got a question. When we ran a very similar bill across the floor last year in the House, I don't know if it got over to the Senate, but it said unless the funds are authorized by Congress for that purpose. Is that in this Senate Bill 5?
Yes, that language is still in here. So if the monies are coming through the federal agency, they can still only be expended for the purposes specified under the Act of Appropriation by Congress.
Okay, so something that came up during debate last year, anything like HAVA grants from the federal government that are authorized by Congress, those are fine. Those aren't affected by this bill?
Yeah, no, anything that's appropriated by Congress and already approved under state law for expenditure is perfectly acceptable.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when on line 18 it says, or instrumentally thereof, what does that really mean?
That would mean any other agency, essentially of a governmental agency. I don't like to use the same term in the definition of a term, and since the term being defined as governmental agency, we use the term instrumentality, but they're essentially synonymous.
So that would not include an NGO or any entity. If, for example, an NGO received the majority of its funds from a federal or a state agency, they would not be included in that?
No, these would be public bodies, public subdivisions of a larger governmental entity.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions for the reviser? Mr. Vice Chairman.
No, just to clarify, I mean, the point the prior representative made, so if the governmental agency gave it to an NGO to give it, I mean, the NGO would be like an instrumentality of the governmental agency. Is that correct? Or is it if they send it to private hands that somehow that gets around being from a governmental agency?
No, not, in this sense, instrumentality is a public body that's expending the funds. This does not prohibit the expenditure of funds by any private entity or organization, because we're talking about expenditure of funds for elections and election-related activities.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but we've already passed a bill that makes it illegal for election officers to use money from private organizations.
That's the statute.
Yeah, so that's already illegal. Okay, are there any other questions for the reviser? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. All right, we'll move on to testimony, and our first and only that I'm aware of proponent is Steve Green. Welcome back to the committee, sir. About time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Steve Green, and I'm providing testimony for Senate Bill 5 on behalf of Opportunity Solutions Project. I just want to be upfront with you that we had somebody that was going to be here but was unable to because of just a prior conflict. And so any sort of detailed questions, you've already asked some really good ones. I might defer and get those answers back to you as soon as possible. This bill, Senate Bill 5, you heard from the reviser, did a great job of explaining it, and you have the testimony before me, is really meant to sort of be targeted towards any federal departments that would otherwise be incentivizing voter turnout or voter registration. It would prevent them with being able to do that unless the legislature was directly approves those activities. This comes from in March of 2021, President Biden signed Executive Order 14019, and it just commanded every federal agency to develop a plan to promote voter registration and voter participation. Where you saw in at least a couple of those federal departments is that there were sort of grants that were being issued that were sort of strings that were attached to them. And what this is doing is just wanting to clarify, provide sort of bright lines to say that really that's an activity of the state legislature. You all have the authority and the responsibility of doing that, and that should sit at your all's power and purview and not the federal government. President Trump, he rescinded the order on January 20th. This really isn't, in a lot of ways, it's a bipartisan issue, no matter who is in the office, whichever party's in the office. We just think that it's the state government or state legislature that should be appropriating these monies, not any other entity. So that's really the core of this bill. Happy to stand for any questions, but would appreciate this committee's support on Senate Bill 5.
Right, are there any questions for Mr. Green? Oh, you're going to let him off easy. Okay, nope, almost. Mr. Vice Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Green, thank you. So I know a year ago when we had this, of course, you had President Biden, and there was a certain concern because he had an executive order that instructed agencies. But on the sort of bipartisan that this cuts either way, it would be somewhat equivalent to, say, President Trump, if he, of course, I don't know if he's instructed, but if some governmental agency was using people to when people sign up for hunter and licenses, that we want to make sure, to stick a voter registration thing in front of them, as far as which could be interpreted, frankly, as being kind of partisan, but this would prevent any sort of federal action in that direction as well. I mean, that would be correct.
Mr. Chair, if I may, yeah, I think that's the intent and also how it would be applied. It really is saying that the state legislature should be the one that's directing the policies pertaining to our elections here in Kansas.
Okay, very good.
Are there any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much. You guys let him off easy. You should have started grilling him. All right. I don't see anybody else listed to speak as a proponent. Does anybody wish to speak as a proponent on Senate Bill 5? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to move on to neutral testimony. And the first conferee and only conferee I have listed is Mr. Clay Barker. Welcome back to the committee, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Clay Barker, General Counsel for the Kansas Secretary of State. And our office is neutral on this bill, and that's because it doesn't affect us. If it's enacted, there'll be no change in our procedures, but we wanted to comment on it so the committee can understand it. And I'm going to start out with the two things this bill does not affect. First, as you heard, that President Biden in March of 2021 issued an executive order that told federal government agencies to, I'm summarizing here, but do more for voter registration. And then President Trump repealed that in January 2025. So that's essentially the top federal executive telling his silo of federal agencies to do something. This bill would not affect that. The other silo that this bill would not affect, and some people sometimes merge these, is when Governor Kelly entered into negotiations with some outside groups, Demos and Loudlight, in November 2019 about agencies under her control doing more for voter registration. And part of this was these outside groups thought she wasn't doing enough pursuant to federal law, the groups that give out benefits. In 2020, as part of those negotiations, the state government sent out 277,000 voter registration forms to people getting benefits, and they came from DCF and KDHE. Then in October 2021, there was an MOU signed between the governor and these outside groups, so essentially if she does certain things, there won't be any litigation. This bill would not touch that because that's the top state executive telling state agencies what to do. So what this bill prohibits is the federal government sending money to state agencies that's not appropriated through the legislature or through Congress that gets repurposed for election reasons. And an example, a mental health grant goes to a county's government or county mental health group. And that group says, well, civic participation helps with mental health, therefore we're going to do a voter registration drive with this money. And the reason for the bill, the reason for that prohibition is that the federal government could target those grants in a way that would be partisan. Biden could use it in a way to help Democrats, Trump could use it in a way to help Republicans, depending what you target money for. And this bill just says the money's got to be appropriated for elections, and that's what can be used for. And in the Senate, there was an amendment placed on this by Senator Francisco, passed, I believe, unopposed, that this would not affect security grants, because election security and administration are conceptually different things. And sometimes law enforcement will get a federal grant, and one of the conditions is 3% or 2% must be spent on election security. And that does not come through the Office of the Secretary of State. Our federal money comes through HAVA, which is appropriated by Congress, and then the legislature reappropriates it to us for security. Often there's a matching funds in there that I'm sure anyone on appropriations and Ways and Means is familiar with. Mr. Chair, but I'll stand for any questions on what this bill does and its effect. It's fairly narrow in scope.
Are there any questions for Mr. Barker? Okay, I'm just preemptively kind of getting this on the record because, again, this was a constant refrain the last time we debated this bill. This has no impact on your ability to receive or distribute HAVA funds. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chair. No impact at all. They are appropriated by Congress and then reappropriated by the state legislature. It's audited. It's only for elections. Our money only goes, either we spend it directly or it goes to county election officers with conditions.
Okay. All right. Are there, Mr. Ranking Minority Member?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Clay, thanks for your testimony. And walk me through, again, the restrictions of the bill. And more importantly, how is it going to be necessarily enforced in your opinion? So like if the federal money is given from a grant and it goes to an agency and they end up using this money for encouraging voter registration, that would be a violation because the funds weren't directed towards an election type initiative. Is that correct?
That's correct, Representative. I understand it, and it would be a crime to do so. Okay. The same way it's a crime for an election official to take non-government money and use it for election.
And so how would that be regulated? Is that the Attorney General? Is that the Secretary of State? Is that how would that be enforced or monitored? Either way.
It's an election crime, so it could be enforced by either the Attorney General or the County District Attorney would have joint jurisdiction over that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, are there any other questions for Mr. Barker? Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. I have no other conferees listed to testify as neutral. Does anybody else wish to speak as neutral on Senate Bill 5? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to move on to opponents, and I have nobody listed to speak as an opponent. Is there anyone wishing to speak as an opponent on Senate Bill 5? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close the hearing on Senate Bill 5. Thank you to all the conferees. All right, committee, we've got some time here, and as you might have noticed last week, House Bill 2054 was referred back to the committee. I'd like to do something a little bit irregular before we open discussion on this bill. I would like to ask Mr. Nye to come back or come up and talk to us about some of the issues and concerns with the bill as it was on the floor and what he proposes to do about it. Welcome back to the committee, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee. So I didn't watch the House debate last week, but I hear that it was there was some confusion. 2054 does two things. The first was just raising the contribution limits, which you heard testimony on that. The second thing had to do with the party committees and removing the caps that currently exist in law to party committees. And I think some of the discussion in this committee had to do with putting parties on an equal playing field as PACs, because PACs can raise unlimited money. There's no cap on the donations from a single donor. One thing that happens when you do that is that parties currently do have special treatment under the law in that parties can coordinate, and parties can also, during a general cycle, give unlimited amounts to a candidate. And so there is concern that if you take the contribution limits off of the party committees, that you're unintentionally creating a loophole for funneling money to candidates outside of the limits that you're raising in this bill, because parties, at least during a general, could take $1 million one day and then the next day just stick it into a candidate's account. And so that's been the constant refrain that I've tried to communicate to this committee over the past several years is as a practitioner, I'm begging you for one standard that applies to a single fact pattern. And if that standard is going to be that candidates have caps, that we shouldn't have basically an unintentional loophole that would allow one particular type of committee to funnel money through that. And so one way to fix this, if you agree with that, closing all loopholes, is to basically, if you're going to treat parties the same as PACs on raising the on unlimited donations, that you should subject them to the same standards as a PAC, which a PAC can't just, can only give up to the candidate limit to candidates. That may or may not be the public policy that you want to pursue. I frankly, at the end of the day, don't really have a preference, not that you're asking me my opinion on how you do it, but whatever you do has to make sense so that there's not an alternative interpretation or a loophole that would allow an unintended consequence. The other way to do this is that I think previous legislatures in the current law said, well, we're going to let parties give unlimited amounts on the back end, but we're going to cap you at $5,000 for county parties and $15,000 for state parties. So we're going to throttle the stream coming in, but not throttle on the way out. And so that would be one way to fix it in this balloon amendment. But what this balloon amendment would do is clarify that we're still going to allow Democrat Party to work in coordination with candidates, and we're going to allow them to spend on behalf of candidates. And so what this balloon amendment would do is say that if you're going to take away the caps on party donations, that the party can only give monetary amounts up to the candidate limits, but they can still spend on behalf of a candidate. So that's the first thing that is probably the most, caused the most confusion. Ultimately, it's a policy decision that as long as you have one standard, you can leave the law as it is, or you can change it, but if you change it, close the loophole.
So before you go on to what else, I didn't set this up well. So when we amended on the floor, we were intending to do what he just described. But after we amended on the floor, there was some concern that the way we amended it could be interpreted by some future Ethics Commission or Director of the Ethics Commission as also capping the party's ability to spend on the candidate. And so that's why on the floor, I asked to bring it back so that we could take a different approach to getting at what it is we're trying to do. So now you can continue with the other stuff this does.
The other way to do it is if you don't want to throttle the back end as far as what you can give to candidates from parties to avoid that 1 million one day to a county party and then a 1 million the next day from the county to the candidate. The other way to do it is just to decide what appropriate caps the party should have on the front end, which is what current law is. The second thing that this bill does is it just happens to be the same statute that involves something that's been floating around for a few years, which is whether the state should follow the federal model in federal election campaign finance laws, which allows candidates subject to limits to accept a primary donation and a general donation at the same time, so you're not having to, a month later go back to that same donor. And so the federal language, this is mirrored after the federal language that would just say there has to be the amount that you collected for the general in your fund at the end of the primary to show that you didn't spend that money until the general. Again, it's a policy decision, but it is what the feds do, and I at least wanted to tee that up for the committee to consider since it happens to be the same statute.
Right, since I've already gone all irregular, I'm going to give you the opportunity to ask any questions you have. So Representative Bergkamp, Ranking Minority Member, and then Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for your comments. So on the bonding or lumping them all into one payment, would you separate that on your report then to say 500 primary, 500 general, just so you knew?
Yes.
Like it was, is that how the mechanics of it?
My thought would be similar to the federal forms, is the Governmental Ethics Commission would just update the forms to have very clear reporting on, hey, we went ahead and took the general check now, and then have a general balance to show that we just kept this escrowed. The other way the bill allows you to do it is to create two different accounts at the bank, just to have a general account and a primary account. But that's not necessarily required if you can show the accounting on the form.
And it'll be up to the commission to set the regulations for how we report. It's just creating the ability to do it. Mr. Ranking Minority Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for your testimony. And because on the day of the debate, what kept going through my mind is, why all of a sudden is this an issue? Because you can go and raise $1 million, and there's nothing in the law that says you can't give that $1 million to the candidate. Is that correct?
That if you undo the caps, nothing in the current law would prevent that.
Okay, even now, though, with caps, I mean, I can keep fundraising, and I can have a bank of $100,000 from all these different donors. I could give that $100,000 under current law to a candidate.
Correct.
So then why do we need the cap of the $1,000 all of a sudden? Why is that necessary? What am I missing? And because if it was bad before, well, man, we've been screwing that up for a while, but now we have to have this amount?
I think that the answer to that is that currently there's no loophole, because the party has to raise those funds $15,000 at a time, the state party. And so you're throttling how much money can come in. Say you've got a billionaire out there, Elon Musk or someone else, that just drops $10 million into a county party, which under this bill would be allowed, because we're letting that legacy law still go. There's nothing that would prevent the county party from turning around and giving that to one of your legislative campaigns. So that quid pro quo concern becomes a lot more present, because there's a loophole that allows the funneling of money to a candidate over the course of 24 hours, whereas in the current law, yes, technically they can do that on the back end, but Elon Musk can only drop $15,000 into the party.
And Mr. Chair, I'm following your logic, and I understand the argument that you're making. I still don't see an answer to the fact, like, why isn't that in place now? But with that said, the point is so if I put $1,000 cap on this and we figure out that, okay, it doesn't impact in-kind contribution, we work that out, then doesn't that mean that the state party can now take $1 million from Elon Musk and just run ads on behalf of anybody they choose to without any degree of accountability or transparency? How's that better if
Well,
that's the
it
case?
may not be. It's a policy discussion. You do it with a PAC currently. And a PAC can run independent expenditures at $10 million. And so at least the policy consideration in the hearing was, if you're going to say parties should be able to have the same amount of free speech as a PAC, then you need to start looking at what can parties do that PACs can't. And so it may be a situation where if it's not broke, don't fix it. Just leave it as is. I think that there are great arguments on both sides, but there are great arguments on the free speech side to say, why are we saying parties are going to have far less speech in Kansas because they can only raise $15,000 or $5,000 at a time, whereas PACs can raise unlimited? And one answer to that is, well, parties can coordinate. Parties can dump unlimited amounts into a candidate. And so in exchange for their special treatment there, we're not going to let them take that $1 million from a big donor. It's all a balance. I just wanted to point out the unintended loophole that when you say free speech for everyone, parties, PACs, everyone, well, PACs can't funnel money. So are you really accomplishing what you're wanting to? So I don't know the right way to do it, but I'm not elected to make those policy decisions. I just want to point it out.
Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have two questions, if that's okay.
Yep.
Thanks. So the first question was kind of back to the spending combination remarks you were making. So just to even further clarify, because that was very confusing to me. So if a candidate was allowed to take the full $1,000, let's say, prior to the primary, they would not be able to spend any of that prior to the primary. They would have to only spend it in the general. But if they then accepted 500 prior to the primary and 500 after, they would have to put one into an escrow and the other, the escrow part kind of confused me as well. I guess because, you know, the way it works now is we get 500 before the primary. We can spend it during the primary or the general, it doesn't matter. But so you're saying if we were to get it separated, we would have to only spend one during a certain part of the cycle and not the other?
I'm gonna hop on that. So first of all, we're talking about a balloon you guys haven't seen yet. So we're gonna
okay,
get,
yeah.
I just want him to explain why we pulled it off the floor. But what he's saying is, and what the balloon says is, you can take up to your limit for both the primary and the general before the primary, but you can only spend, from one person, but you can only spend like your limit before the primary. You have to hold on to the other 1,000. So if they gave you 500 and 500, you're under the limit, so you can spend it all before the primary. But if they gave you 1,500, you would have to hold on to the 500 till after the primary.
Got it.
Which is how it works federally.
Right, okay.
So this is really an elected official friendly amendment where you meet with the donor in July. You know they're going to max out at both primary and general. But right now, you can say, well, I can only really take the 500 now. I'll be back in 2 weeks after the primary. This would allow them to write one check, but then you're responsible for only spending $500 of it.
1,000, because we're doubling.
Well, yeah.
We're doubling the
say
limit.
the current limit's 500, 500. You'd spend the 500, but you'd have to prove to the public and governmental ethics that you kept the general money unspent until August 5th.
Well, so, and that was where my second question was going. So in this conceptual amendment that we've got going on right now, so you would, how would you prove that into your ethics report?
Well, you have to report expenditures, right?
Right.
So if at the end of the reporting period, you had less money than you had taken for the general election, you're in violation of the law. You'd have to, any money that you took that has to be reserved for the general, you have to have that amount of money at the end of that, of the primary reporting period. And that's how you prove that you held on to that money.
And I can understand that, but I think that part of my concern would be like, okay, you know, you've got a lot of money. Let's say, you know, you've got $50,000, and you're only spending $30,000. How do you prove that you didn't spend that extra money, you know, specifically from that individual?
Fungible, so it's,
Right.
you would have to have that amount. I mean.
Okay, okay.
And again, we're anticipating how the Governmental Ethics Commission is going to draft regulations to implement.
But the point is that the feds have done this for a long time. It's pretty basic math that you report your balance at the end of the primary. And as long as that balance is more than what you said you accepted for general, you're good.
Okay, so we just, yeah, I get it. Thanks.
I'm going to stop question and answer here because I really just wanted him to come up and explain what the issue was, and he's been very gracious with his time and yeah.
Thing, I did send this over to governmental ethics because I frankly thought that this idea of loopholes corresponded with their concerns on the original 2054. I don't know if they're going to take a position on this, but I am trying to keep them in the loop. And ultimately, there's only the best thing you could do is create one standard so that there's no unintended consequences, so that somebody gets in trouble for something that they didn't think was illegal.
Okay, so we've been talking about the bill for 20 minutes, so I think I would entertain a motion to, on this bill so that we can proceed. Mr. Vice Chairman, not that motion, no.
I would make a motion that we pass House Bill 2054. We're bringing it for discussion. Favor for passage, however you want
Do
to.
I have a second? Okay, second from Representative James. All right, with that, is there any discussion? I have an amendment. Could you hand it out, Mr. Revisor?
Such a surprise. Right.
You want to switch chairs so we can all get in our correct positions?
All right, so committee, we've talked about this quite a bit already, but essentially what this does is fix the problem from the floor. So unlimited donations to a party, the party is limited to the same limits as a PAC or an individual in contributions directly to the candidate. But there's a carve out here, which is the text in the balloon to the side on page 2 that makes it clear that the party is allowed to spend money on behalf of the candidate, and that can't be construed by ethics as an in-kind donation. So this gets at the intent that I was trying to get with the amendment on the floor. And then the other thing that this does, also in that balloon there, is it allows you to take the money for the primary and the general before the primary election, but you can't spend the general election money till after the primary. And then the last thing that I did is on page 3 at the bottom, it seemed kind of silly to make this bill not effective until July when the reporting period's not till January of next year, because people are going to start fundraising as soon as the session's over. And so I changed the effective date from when it's published in the statute book to the Kansas Register so that it'll go into effect faster, so that people can start implementing these new rules. And you've heard the motion for the amendment. Do I have a second? A second from Representative Sutton. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you elaborate a little bit on the separate accounts aspect of it?
Yeah, so this creates two mechanisms by which you can distinguish your primary money from your general money that you're accepting before the primary. You can have two accounts, or you can just, through accounting, make sure that you're designating which funds are for the general and which ones are for the primary. Yes.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. So this wouldn't necessarily limit if, let's say that you have some money left over from the primary, it wouldn't limit you from spending it in the general?
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. Okay, Representative Bergkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So sometimes, like in a letter you receive, it says this is for the primary or for the general. So I guess if you only had, let's say under the new statute, we got the max contribution of a $2,000, well, we'll just say 1,000, but they said 500 for each. That would just be upon us to say, well, it's not 1,000 for the primary. We have to break that apart.
And again, this bill, the underlying bill, raises all of our limits to 1,000. So it'd be, you could take 1,000 for the primary and 1,000 for the general. You could take it all at once, but you'd have to sit aside that 1,000 until after the primary.
Yeah, and just a follow-up, I guess accounting method could just be a spreadsheet, correct, that keeps track of?
Yeah, I mean, it could be, I imagine it. I'm sure we're going to get regulations from ethics, but in my mind, it could be a little notation in your checkbook that this is for the general, or a separate spreadsheet of this is the money that I have to hold out till the general.
Yeah, and I definitely support this as long as it wouldn't create more work than what it is today, so.
Yeah, holding two fundraisers is more work than writing it in your checkbook, so. Are there any other questions on the amendment? Mr. Ranking Minority Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So after our presentation that we had, I'm left with the question of, are we trying to look at party committees now as PACs? I get the argument that contribution limits is a measurement of freedom of speech, but now we're putting this limitation in because, well, it's unlimited for PACs, so we need to put the limit in for our state party committee. So are we now stating that our state party committee is the equivalent of a PAC? Has that been our argument the entire time?
Oh, I think the idea, all I can speak to is my reason for holding hearings on this bill and my reason for bringing it to the floor and advocating for its passage. And my personal reason why I think this is a good thing, and I think it's backed up by the testimony that we heard from proponents, is if you want to get PAC money out of our politics, if you want our elections to be more transparent and more accountable, then the parties have to be at least on par with the PACs in their ability to participate in the process. What this does is it makes the parties more powerful than the PACs in one way. Parties can coordinate with the candidate. A PAC cannot coordinate with the candidate. So this puts the parties in a position of being more powerful than the PACs, with the hope that contributors, donors, because the money's going to be in the politics either way, the hope is that donors will give to the party instead of the PAC, and it'll diminish the impact of PACs in the process. That's my reason for bringing this to a hearing and bring it to the floor, and I think we heard the same thing from several of the proponents.
Yeah, and I, Mr. Chair, I do appreciate that, and you are correct. We did hear that from the proponents. On the opponent side, though, it doesn't seem like we're doing anything better. It just seems like we've now made state party committees PACs. And so I don't see how the argument of we're going to take money out of politics here. We've just now made our state party a PAC. And that seems to be not the direction that the State Ethics Commission wants.
So in response to that, I would say on Saturday, I'm going to be in Goodland, Kansas for the Kansas GOP reorganization meeting. And we have over 100 delegates from all over the state, some of them elected precinct committee people, some of them elected representatives, some of them representatives of statewide office holders. And we're going to hold an election for who's going to lead the state party committee. And that state party committee wants voters to vote for their party. So they're in many ways accountable to the voters of all of Kansas. A PAC is set up with a form with the Kansas Governmental Ethics Commission. It's people that are handpicked to run that PAC, and they're not accountable to anybody.
Well, the PACs do have governing boards too. It's not just like walking off the street and we're going to create. I mean, so I understand your logic, and on that, I disagree fundamentally on it, but I just wanted to have my voice heard.
No, and I appreciate it. Any other discussion? Representative Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate what you're trying to do here. I guess I'm wondering, if we're trying to close a loophole, why are we choosing to ramp up party spending instead of seeking out regulations on the other side for PACs?
So so your alternative solution would be to limit the amount of money that went to PACs?
I understand there are obviously reservations about what you can do with that. But yeah, I suppose I just want to raise the red flag that I'm not sure empowering parties with more money is necessarily going to empower candidates in the way that we want. I very much appreciate your intention here, to be clear. I just have reservations that by empowering parties, we're silencing those that are outside of the establishment. And so I guess as we work forward, I would just encourage all of us to think through that here, and maybe another option could be looking to close the loopholes without further empowering parties.
And that's a fair point. My concern with that approach is what we heard in the October 2023 interim hearing is the money gets into politics. And if you close the PAC door, which I'm not sure is constitutional because of Supreme Court rulings, if you were able to do that and it was able to withstand court challenge, you would then be seeing money routed to nonprofits, C3, C4s, which is happening now, but is not happening as much because more of the money is going into the PAC route. But I think the top line concern is I'm not sure it's constitutional because the Supreme Court said that money is speech, and you can't limit a political group, that's not affiliated with the candidate from speaking or taking money. Is there any other discussion? Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the second time. So maybe it would help if we had a little bit of clarification on the difference between reporting requirements for PACs compared to party. Because I think I remember in testimony last week that one of them doesn't have to report who brings the money in; they just report who they spend it on. Or maybe I'm.
So they both have to report who brings in the money. One of the challenges that we heard in the October 23 hearing is that folks will set up a C4, they'll collect a bunch of money from a bunch of people, and then they'll dump all of the money into the PAC because they don't have to report who gave to the nonprofit. And so I'm hoping that this will short circuit that. Mr. Vice Chairman.
So, I can appreciate this lining up with the federal rule on, one check for the primary and the general. But so what happens when somebody's running and they lose their primary? I mean, they might have taken money, like on the presumption they're going to be in the general, but they lose.
It's the same thing that happens if you take money in the general and you lose the general. You still have your campaign account and the money's still in there. You could give it to a nonprofit, you could pay it back to the donors, or you could hope that you can run next time and win, which is what most people do ceaselessly.
And another, okay, so just again for point of clarification on this. So, in this House bill, of course, we struck, the sections, of course, had been struck originally before this amendment even, about the limits of giving to parties, which there already is no limit in giving to PACs as far as just outside groups. But both PACs and parties can only give the $1,000 to a rep. Just they're equal there, but parties do have the advantage. They can only give the $1,000 directly, but they can, in the same way that the Chamber, the Kansas Values Institute, or any on the left or right outside PAC can run mailers for you and whatever, but they can't do it in coordination. The party, though, has the advantage that they actually can do it in coordination if they do. And that's fundamentally how we're restructuring by the original bill and the amendment, so that it's more sort of transparent, but it also gives the party somewhat of a most favored advantage, in supporting candidates in a campaign, which
this is what I intended to do with the floor amendment. We just didn't, it didn't, there were some problems with the floor amendment. The idea is to make it more appealing to a donor to give the money to a party than to the PAC, because the party can talk to the candidate, find out exactly what the candidate needs, and augment his campaign and his or her campaign in that way.
All right, very good.
Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I see a little more clearly where you're going with this, though, but I do have a question for the group because I really don't know the answer. Are PACs allowed to coordinate with parties, though?
I'm getting vigorous side-to-side head nods from all of the people, all the lawyers in the room. So I'm going to say the answer is no, they can't coordinate with parties.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better. Thank you.
Yep. All right, are there any other questions on the amendment? Mr. Ranking Minority Member.
For like the fourth time, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going back through the testimonies, and I'm having a hard time kind of following the balloon, and I'm just wondering, have we visited with the Ethics Commission on this? I mean, is there enough time for them to create the rules in order for this to roll out based upon the change in the implementation?
So we have coordinated with the Governmental Ethics Commission. They've not taken a position on this amendment, but the first reporting period's not until January of next year. So they've got a bit of time. And at the end of the day, we could use the exact same reporting system that we have now. They could just require us to do an affidavit that this is how much money I didn't spend till the general or whatever. So, okay. Representative Bergkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My last question, I promise. So if this were to go into effect, a donor couldn't give something to the party and say, you have to spend 80% of this on a candidate, correct? To kind of get around the...
Yeah, so earmarking right now, until we've had any kind of change in the law, earmarking, the current interpretation of the Ethics Commission is that that's giving in the name of another. So could that interpretation change at some point? Yes. But right now, that's how they read it.
Okay, thank you. I can remember.
Mr. Vice Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I do want to address, I thought there was a reasonably good point made about the as far as, outsiders versus insiders, as far as, first timers. And I will say the fact that we have doubled the contribution limits for candidates. I mean, I had my first two House campaigns. I took no PAC money. I ran it totally independently. And I mean, outside groups came in on both sides, but nevertheless, the fact that you could double what you're asking for people would give you as a first-time candidate, a lot more oomph, that you're currently missing. Because then again, if you look at anytime you guys, if you're a newcomer challenger, you never have the outside PAC donations that come in when you're an incumbent. As a newcomer, that is almost non-existent. And so by making it with just, well, anybody you would request, but that you can get more money on your own, I think is a big plus.
And I would just add that anybody that thinks, I've never been to a Democrat Party convention, but anybody who thinks that the Kansas GOP is full of establishment insiders should come to our reorg. It's a rough and tumble bunch of grassroots activists. And so, yeah. All right, is there any other discussion on the amendment? Okay, seeing no discussion, I close on my amendment. Committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor of amending signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no? No. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion carries. The bill's amended. We're back on the bill. Is there any more discussion on the bill? Mr. Ranking Minority Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an amendment.
Okay, Mr. Advisor, if you'd...
We're going to the second one, section 2.
All right, and if, while he's handing them out, if you'd like to explain what your amendment does?
Yes, thank you. You know, after the debate and discussion, visiting with our leader and representative from Wichita, Sawyer, try to find a way in which hearing what you wanted to accomplish and also coming up with a logical approach to regulating this, supporting what our presenter gave. This amendment is found on page 2, section 2. What it is doing is actually capping the contribution limits for a recognized party committee. So that's like the Kansas for a Democratic House. It's not the state party. And then I have some handouts here to kind of explain, if you want to pass this out here, to demonstrate. The limits would not be for national party, state party, anything else. This would just be for recognized party committees, and this limit would actually triple the current amount. And this provides the opportunity for us to maintain the party committee function of it, not fully going down the unregulated, if you will, PACs or the unlimited amount of funds for PACs. There are limits, but it also is important to have this limit because it helps with grassroots efforts, keeping the playing field fair. So new candidates who want to run for office can seek the support, but also it prevents, you know, the overpowering of retaining of incumbents or removing incumbents who don't join party lines. It draws a limit, and because it's an up and down vote, and these committees are focused specifically on positions that we have right now, we felt that this limitation would be in order and would be also going back to our constituents and saying, you know, we believe in free speech, but we also believe in proper fiscal responsibility and handling of our funds that you donate to us and being transparent. And so we want to put a cap on what we can receive as House Dems or Kansas GOP House members. So again, this is not the Kansas Democratic Party. This is only for those that are recognized by the state as party committees.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion to amend. Is there a second? Okay, second by Representative Meyer. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Mr. Vice Chairman.
Just understand this. Except a state party committee. So this is, you're talking about the sort of subsidiary committees, but not literally the Kansas Republicans or Kansas Democrats.
Yeah, I appreciate that question because it's taken me 2 days to kind of figure out what we really wanted. And yes, it's, so the Kansas, for the Democratic Party for the House has Kansans for a Democratic House. It's our own committee that we raise funds for, that we help. The Ethics Commission identifies them as other committees, or more specifically, a recognized party committee. That recognized party committee is usually done in coordination with the state party. So it is a party committee, but it's more of a specific format or of a party committee.
So I thought I understood the amendment until you answered that question. So this does not impose limits on the state party committees, just all the other party committees?
Just all the other party committees. It does not for the Kansas Department, or sorry, the Kansas Democratic Party, not the Kansas GOP. That is completely, those are identified as state party committees. This is only for those that we have within our legislative branches.
Is there any other discussion? Is there any other discussion on the amendment? Representative Sutton.
All right, I want to make sure. These are contributions from. Have we discussed, did you pass this amendment by any lawyers on this one? Just
the power, the dynamic Jason Long helped revise.
Oh, there is that. That
no, this is
volumes.
So finish your question if that was.
Well, no, I just worry about the constitutionality. That's
no,
all.
This is actually this table minus the, well, with the correct spelling of words, is straight from the Kansas Ethics Commission. And the source is down below. So if you looked up contribution limits, you would see you would see what's in the current category right there. And all I've done is made the motion to multiply that by 3. So it increases it 3 times. I'm not changing anything but the amounts for this particular group.
All right, thank you.
Committee, my comment on this amendment, I believe it comes from a good place, but I'm not certain that the way this is written, it doesn't also limit state party committees, and even if it doesn't, I think that it undermines the original intent of the bill, so I'd ask the committee to oppose this amendment. Is there any other discussion? Representative Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just continue to fail to see the need for this legislation. There are members of this body that have well over $100,000 sitting in their accounts, and they're free and easy until they make the choice to leave. And I'm just not sure that I believe introducing more money into our system of government and politics is going to contribute to constructive legislating. Thank you.
Okay. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Okay, Representative James.
This is for the minority chair. Why is this better than the other amendment that was in your opinion?
Well, they're two separate. Our concern is what we hit upon earlier is that what we're doing is we're creating PACs. Right now, we have regulated committees that have limitations on funds. And I honestly, if you ask me, I feel like we're going in the wrong direction. If we really want to get money out of the parties, then we should reduce the contribution amounts that we have. So we have an issue with all of it, but to show bipartisanship and to show an effort, we just recommend that you can remove the limits on all the others, but for this recognized party committee, the one that directly impacts our candidacies and our elections, let's just increase it 3 times so you can take in more money and have it something in which we can go back to our constituents and say, we didn't create multiple mini PACs, if you will.
All right, is there any other discussion on the amendment? Okay, seeing no more discussion, Mr. Ranking Minority Member, would you like to close on your motion?
Thank you for the question. Those are going to be my final comments. I close my motion.
Okay, committee, you've heard the motion from the Ranking Minority Member to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay? Okay. The nays appear to have it?
Nays. You know what? I will accept that because
Okay.
you guys were creative on your nays.
Okay. All right, the motion fails. We're back on the bill. Is there any more discussion on the bill? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Vice Chairman, would you like to renew your motion as amended?
Yes, I move that we pass favorably House Bill 2054 as amended.
And I don't remember who seconded. Representative James, you renew your second? I do. Okay. All right. Committee, you've heard the motion to pass House Bill 2054 favorably as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay? No. The ayes appear to have it, though neither was enthusiastic. The ayes do have it. The motion carries. So the bill is passed. Committee, this concludes our work for today. Tomorrow, we'll be discussing Senate Bill 6. I would like to, if the committee, I'm sorry, Thursday, I'm sorry, translate my nonsense into language. I would like to, if it's possible, if there's no objections, work Senate Bill 5 on Thursday. So if you have amendments, please get with Mr. Long so that we can have the balloons available for Thursday. And then next week, we will not be meeting right now on Tuesday. It's on call chair. If there's an emergency, we might meet. But then on Thursday, I'm hoping to hear Senate Bill, is it 177 or 105? 105. Senate Bill 105, but it hasn't been referred to the committee right now yet. So right now, when you see the agenda, it's going to say informational hearing on, but as soon as we get it referred to the committee, it'll change to a hearing on that. I just want to give everybody a heads up so they weren't surprised. And with that, is there anything for the good of the order? We were so close. Okay, I apologize. All right. I got to get back where I was here. Sorry, I'm buried in amendments now.
Mr.
All right.
Mr. Chair, can we get in the minutes for today that you were wanting to be invited to a Democrat party?
There's objection.
It's this Friday and Saturday.
Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, I will be busy. All right, committee, you were sent the minutes for February 11th and February 13th. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that these minutes are amazing and appropriate. Let's pass them out favorably. Thank you. Or adopt the minutes, please.
Okay, I've got a second from the ranking minority member. Is there any discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of approval of the minutes for February 11th and 13th signify by saying aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The minutes are approved. Okay, committee, with no other business, we are adjourned.